Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kuf Yud Amud Beis. 5 lines from the bottom. Our Mishnah share with us the following principle in regards to refuah on Shabbos. If a healthy person could eat or drink a certain food or drink, then even an ill person can eat or drink that item for healing purposes. And therefore our Mishnah said if a person were to drink what's called kos ikarin, since only an ill person would drink that in order to then heal his jaundice, it is prohibited on Shabbos. What is kos ikarin? The Gemara identified it as being 3 different components. It's gum from Alexandria, it is alum, and it's also a garden saffron together. The Gemara said if a person mixes wine with those 3 items, it will not cause him to become barren, to become sterile. However, if indeed he does mix 2 of these items, and he does mix it with beer instead, he will become sterile. The Gemara now quotes the statement that he made before, Lirei Kona, in regards to somebody who has jaundice, train b'shichra umei akar. If you take 2 out of these 3 components and drink it together with beer, then he will become sterile. Ask the Gemara, Umi Shari, even during the week, is this permitted that a person should become sterile? Vahatanya, the Brisa says the following, Minayin l'seirus ba'adam shu asur. From where do we know that a person cannot castrate? Talmud loymar uba'artzechem lo yisasu. The pasuk in its entirety is read as follows in regards to an animal that is not to be brought as an offering, because it says umoch, that if his testicles are either squeezed, v'kosus, or they are crushed, v'nosuk, or that they are torn, v'karus, or that they are cut, lo yisakriv l'Hashem, you cannot bring such an animal as a carbon. Uba'artzechem lo yisasu, and the pasuk says, in your land you shall not do. What does castrating have to do with ba'aretz? Even outside of Eretz Yisrael, it would be prohibited to then castrate. So therefore, whether the animal is a animal that is a chaya or a behema, whether it is tahor or it's tameh, it's usr, it's prohibited to castrate. But not only that, it says uba'artzechem lo yisasu. The Gemara now brings the Brisa to explain as follows: uba'artzechem lo yisasu bochem lo yisasu. In you, in Klal Yisrael, it shall not be done. Di Rabbi Chanina. So we're left the question: how can you even take a potion that will cause one to become sterile, even during the week, no less Shabbos? Answers the Gemara, Hani mili heicha decha mechavin. When is this so? When a person has intention to make him or somebody else sterile. But hacha me'atzmaihu. But over here, it's a side product, a byproduct. He wants to then take the potion in order to then heal himself from jaundice. And as a side effect, he becomes sterile. The Omar Rabbi Yochanan harotze sheyisares tarnegol yitol bekarbalosoi umistares me'elov. A person wants to cause a rooster become sterile, then take off the red piece that's on top of him, the karbalosoi, and he will then become sterile as a side product. Says the Gemara, that's not so. What all you've done is by taking the karbalosoi off is make him so he's no longer arrogant, and then he has no interest in then mating with a hen. And that's why he no longer then, it's like he's become sterile, but he's not really infertile. Ella answers the Gemara, over here we're talking about bisaris, a person who was already castrated. And then it says over here that a person then takes such a potion, he can do so. Only on Shabbos it's prohibited because of refuah. I asked the Gemara, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Yochanan, with on top of Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, Hakol Moedim, everybody agrees. In regards to a korban menachos, a flour offering, there it says that not only if that which is already leavened, but if a person makes a process of leavening when making the menachos, that person is further going to be over an iser. Shenemar states lo se'ofe chametz, lo se'ose chametz. And therefore he'll get malchus, even though it already was leavened, but he adds leavening on the leaven. In regards to a behemoth that's a Baal Mum, then there's a Machlokes. Can you add a Mum on top of the behemoth that already has a Mum? Can you go ahead and let blood from it? Because after all, it's already a Bechor that has a Mum. So there's a Machlokes. But in regards to making a Korban Mincha more leavened, even after it was already leavened, that everybody agrees is prohibited to do so. So to over here, by castrating after castrating, in other words, by making one sterile, even after he was already sterile, that itself is going to be chayiv. Shenemar says umoch, the post that we brought before, v'kosus v'nosuk v'korus. Explains im al korus chayiv, if by cutting one is chayiv, which means only cutting part of where the testicles are, is he going to be chayiv for castrating? Al nosuk l'kol shekain. Then on tearing the whole part out, certainly he would be chayiv. So why mention nosuk if anyways he's going to be chayiv for korus? Ella lahavi noisek achar koresh shehu chayiv. To tell me that one would be chayiv even after he already did a small cutting to then tear the full part off. Ve'ella, so therefore we're left the question: how can we then have a situation where a person was taking such a potion even during the week? It'll cause him to be sterile. Answers the Gemara, Ella bizokein. We're talking about a person who is an elderly man, and therefore the kimta is an elderly man can no longer have then the ability to then have children. So therefore he can drink this potion during the week. V'omar Rabbi Yochanan asked the Gemara, but Rabbi Yochanan said, Hein hichsiruni lina'arusi. When I took certain refuos, it caused me the ability to then have relations once again. It brought me back to my youth. And therefore that can't be an answer that he was an older person, because an older person doesn't become infertile necessarily. Ella bi'isha. Rather, it must be talking about a woman. And therefore a woman who doesn't have the mitzvah of procreating, then if she takes the potion, there's no problem. Ask the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broker the Omer, Al Shnehem hu oimer. On both man and woman it states the mitzvah puravu. Vayivarach oisam elokim vayomer lehem puravu. My ikalemem. What are you going to say about this? Answers the Gemara bizkeina. We're talking about a woman who's an elderly woman who lost her ability to then have children. She can go ahead and drink this type of potion. Inami, and it's not an issue of becoming sterile after sterile, because over here we're saying that this situation of a woman is not an Indian of making herself sterile. She just doesn't have the ability at all to then have a child. She lost that ability, and therefore there's no issue over here. Sirus acher sirus. Alternatively, inami ba'akoro, or a woman who was barren in the first place. She could never have children, and therefore she can drink such a potion. The Gemara now brings the following Mishnah in regards to refuah on Shabbos. Hachoshesh b'shinov. If a person has pain by his teeth, lo yigma bohenes hachoymetz, he cannot rinse out his mouth with vinegar, because people do not do that unless they have a need for refuah, and therefore it would be clearly that he's doing it for medicinal purposes on Shabbos. Aval metabel hu kedarka, but he can go ahead and take a piece of bread, for example, and dip it into vinegar and put it on his mouth and eat it. Im nisrapa nisrapa. If he gets healed, then he gets healed, and that's permissible on Shabbos. The Mishnah continues, b'masnov. If a person has pain around his loins, that means between his rib and his hip, lo yosuch yayin v'choymetz, he cannot rub wine or vinegar, because these are things that a healthy person doesn't use to then put on such an ailment, and therefore on his body, and therefore it's clearly he's doing so because of refuah. Aval sochu es hashemen. But since a healthy person does put shemen on his body, therefore he can also put shemen on his mosnayim. Velo shemen vered. However, the Mishnah says, but not a shemen that was made with roses, because that's a very expensive type of shemen, and therefore an average person does not use such a shemen because of its expense. The only reason why we're doing it because he does so for medicinal purposes. Says the Mishnah, B'nei Melachim sochin shemen. However, the Tanna Kamma goes on to say, but B'nei Melachim, since they do use this for regular purposes during the week, then they can use so on Shabbos. Again, b'nei malachim sochin shemen vered al makosein shekain darken lasuch bechol. Since they normally use this on their bodies during the week, they can also use it on their makos, on their wounds on Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon argues and he says, Kol Yisrael b'nei malachim heim. All of the Klal Yisrael have the same din as b'nei malachim, and therefore they can also use shemen vered on Shabbos. Ask the Gemara the following question on the Reisha. Rami le Rav Acha bariko dehava Rav Acha bar Papa Rabbi Abohu. He asked the following question, Rabbi Abohu. Tnan, it says in the Mishnah, Hachoyshesh b'shinov lo yigma bohen es hachoymetz. Our Mishnah says, it teaches us that a person who has pain in their mouth because of their teeth, they cannot use vinegar. They can't rinse their mouth with vinegar. Lememra the choymetz mala l'shinaim. Ask the Gemara, does that mean to say that vinegar will be a benefit to the teeth because he has pain in his teeth? V'haksi, but the pasuk says in Mishlei, kechoymetz l'shinayim uke'oshen le'einayim. Just as we know that when it comes to smoke, it's bad for the eyes, so it says over here that the vinegar is to the teeth, and therefore vinegar is also then going to be not good. It's going to be harmful to the teeth. And says the Gemara, Lokasho ha b'kiyua depri had bechala. This that it says in Mishlei is talking about kiyua depri. That's talking about where a wine was made with immature, unripened type of grapes, and therefore that causes damage to the teeth. But this that which says in the Mishnah is talking about regular vinegar. Iboy seima. Alternatively, ha veha bechala. They're both talking about vinegar, even that which in the Mishlei is talking about vinegar. What's the difference? Ha di'ika maka, ha deleka maka. The Mishnah is talking about when a person had a maka, meaning in his gums. Then it's going to be beneficial to have vinegar in his mouth. Whereas, if he does not have any problem with his gums, only has some pain in his tooth, let's say he has a cavity, then the vinegar will be harmful. Ika maka masile. If he has a maka, a wound in his gums, then it'll be a healing for him. Leke maka mrafi. If he does not have a maka, then it will then actually loosen the gums and affect the teeth. It'll be bad for the teeth, and therefore that's what Mishnah is talking about. The Gemara now quotes the Mishnah saying, Lo yigma bohenes hachoymetz. We said you cannot wash out your mouth with vinegar. In fact, the Gemara v'hatanya, it says in the Brisa, Lo yigma upoilate. You cannot take the vinegar, put it in your mouth and spit it out on Shabbos, but you could go ahead and take it, sip it, and swallow it. Omar Abaye. So the Brisa seems to then indicate other than our Mishnah, because our Mishnah seems to indicate there's no differentiation. Says Abaye, that's what the Mishnah also means. Omar Abaye, kitnan nami masnisin megame upolet tnan. That which our Mishnah is talking about that when you took it in your mouth to rinse out and you spit it out, that's when it's prohibited. But if you were to swallow the vinegar, just as the Bryce is stating, it would be permissible. That's the answer of Abaye. Rava suggests something else. Rava Omar, afilu teimo megame uboleya. You can say the Mishnah is talking about where he took the vinegar in his mouth and he swallowed it, and still it is prohibited. Because kan lifnei tibul, kan la'achar tibul. The differentiation between our Mishnah and the Brisa is that if it's lifnei tibul, before they're talking about eating, they used to then dip, so it's referring to before the eating, then the Brisa is saying it's permissible. Because then when a person does take it in his mouth, even though he's going to then swallow it, that person is not clearly using it for medicinal purposes because it's preparing himself for food, for eating. So it's part of the meal. Whereas if he already ate, then he does it, then it's for medicinal purposes, and that's what the Mishnah is talking about as being prohibited. Ask the Gemara, v'neima medilifnei tibul shari la'achar tibul nami shari. Let's say, however, that if it's going to be permissible before the eating, it should be also permissible afterwards. The shamina leila Rav, because Rava teaches us the islay hoyel, the concept of hoyel. Rava teaches us somewhere else that in regards to Shabbos, a person could be toivel on Shabbos in the waters. And we don't say it's like a kli that's being matbil a kli, because a kli is now a tikkun to the kli if a person's matbil it into the water, into the mikvah. Whereas a person who's toivel, it doesn't look like a tikkun, because you can say he's doing it so for cooling himself off, for rechitza. The Gemara says, but that's difficult because on Yom HaKippurim, we know that it's permitted to do so, and yet there it should be viewed as a tikkun, because one is not able to be roichet on Yom HaKippurim. To which Rava says that since it is permissible on Shabbos, therefore it's permissible even on Yom HaKippurim. And therefore the Chacham did not make a gzeira because of this principle of hoyel. They didn't want to say that on Shabbos was even more severe in regards to chilul malacha, chilul Shabbos, which carries with it a chiyuv of skila, which is even more stringent than that which is being mechalel the malacha on Yom HaKippurim, which is merely kares, not merely, but it's kares, but not skila. So therefore, they didn't want to say that it's mutter on Shabbos, but it would be prohibited on Yom HaKippurim. Therefore, they were makil and said, hoyel, since it's permissible on Shabbos, it's permissible on Yom HaKippurim. So say the same thing over here. Just like it's permissible before one eats, the Chacham were also makil and said even after one eats. Doma Rava, leka midi de b'Shabbos shari, u'b'Yom HaKippurim also. We can't say that something is going to be then something permissible on Shabbos, which is not permissible on Yom HaKippurim. Hoyel the b'Shabbos shari, b'Yom HaKippurim shnam b'shari. Since on Shabbos is permissible, therefore on Yom HaKippurim the Chacham were makil and said it's also permissible. So the Gemara is left with a question. Why don't we say again that the same way that one could go ahead and then take vinegar in his mouth before the meal, let him do so after the meal too? Answers the Gemara, Hadar be Rava mehach. Rava, he was chayzer from this chiluk between before and after the meal, and indeed he held like Abaye's chiluk that we saw just before, that Abaye told us that in regards to the brisa is talking about where a person is drinking it and he swallows it, whereas the Mishnah is talking about where he puts it in his mouth and he spits it out. Then it's going to be osir, because it clearly indicates that he's doing so for medicinal purposes. Ask the Gemara, how do you know that Rava was chayzer from this yishuv of our Mishnah and our brisa by saying that it's no longer talking about before and after the eating? Maybe he was chayzer from that which it said, the concept of hoyel. Says the Gemara, that can't be. Lois hakedaitoch. The Tanya kol chayvet tevilois toivlin kedarkon bein Tisha B'Av bein b'Yom HaKippurim. It says over here that they were matir, somebody be to toivil himself both on Tisha B'Av and Yom HaKippurim, and therefore because of the concept of hoyel that Rav was saying, that is the reason why we're not going to prohibit it, says the Chachamim, on Yom Kippur, since we do permit it also on Shabbos.